Hey, David Brewster here with a new episode of Soloing Secrets, and this is Albert King, a huge episode here. Albert is essential, very important and influential, definitely saturated and influenced the entire scene. And Albert's career started somewhere around 1949, and then during his career he released 15 studio albums, 15 live albums, over 20 compilations, and 47 singles. And even though none of those singles actually hit the top 10, he did have some that were close, like they hit 14 or 15 on the charts. But definitely his importance and influential, guitar playing inspired, people like Jimi Hendrix, Eric Clapton, Stevie Ray Vaughan, and tons of other players. Definitely Albert is essential. So much like we've done in other episodes in the Soloing Secrets series, when you're checking out a certain player or band, it's a great idea to scope out their influences, which will reveal a lot of things they like to do in their music. And with Albert, it's a lot of early blues, musicians and guitarists. And you have to think a lot of the players we've looked at in this series were influenced by Albert King. Now we're looking at Albert, and we're kind of scoping out some of his influences, which go back even further, right here. Now, during Albert's career and lifetime, he definitely worked with a whole bunch of different people, especially the later years. But I really like the earlier, kind of late 60s, early 70s, when he was working with artists like Booker T and the MGs. Of course, Steve Cropper right there. Also, the Bar-Kays and the Memphis Horns and stuff. But here's an image with some of the people Albert King, worked and recorded and performed with in his lifetime and career. As far as Albert's actual soloing secrets, the things he'd like to do when he'd pick up a guitar and play a lick or a fill or a solo or something, and there's a lot. Definitely a lot of direct blues influence and blues phrasing, pentatonic scales, bending, and vibrato. And speaking of bending, we are going to hit a lot of Albert's index finger bending, which is very demanding. It'll definitely chew up your index finger, kind of bending this way if you haven't done it before. And we're also going to investigate Albert's, the Albert King box, his namesake, kind of pentatonic position. But there's a lot, definitely in Albert's world. But here's a, image showing some of his soloing secrets. So you may have noticed at the beginning of this episode, but this lesson is tuned down a whole step. And there might be some viewers out there wondering, like, why did Dave tune down a whole step? But that's because Albert tuned to like an F6 tuning, which is really weird. And it was CF, CF, AD. So technically the top 4 strings of Albert's guitar was tuned down a whole step. It's those bottom 2 strings, the low E and the A, that he tuned kind of weird. And that low E was all the way down to a C, and then that A string was down to an F. But I just basically kind of adapted, the top part of his tuning and then just tuned down a whole step. I didn't really want to kind of mess with the F6 tuning. So if you want to match Albert exactly, tune your guitar to F6, which I'm going to show this image here. And if you want to play along with me during this lesson, just tune down a whole step. Just a heads up. So the music and examples in this episode came from 3 Albert King related albums, and that includes Born Under a Bad Sign, Lovejoy, and I Want to Get Funky. And definitely Albert's career extended, multiple decades, and he had different lineups and groups that he played with and guest appearances and stuff. But my favorite era of his career is that late 60s, early 70s kind of time span when he was working with Booker T and the MGs and Steve Cropper and then eventually the Bar-Kays and the Memphis Horns. That's my favorite period of Albert's career, and we're going to hit a lot of music from those albums in that time frame. So here we go. Alright, with the opening jam, that was For the Love of a Woman from the album Lovejoy. Definitely one of my favorite Albert King albums, and that's a great song, too. And keep in mind, we're tuned down a whole step, right? So the first thing I'm going to do here is show you the rhythm part, because there's some interesting things happening there. And the MXR clone looper was handling that during the opening jam. And then we're going to break down the solo. But we're tuned down a whole step. So the riff right here, it's basically playing with the octave and the flat 7. It's going to feel and look like B, but in this tuning, it's actually going to sound like A. So I'm going to refer to all these chords to where they are on the fretboard instead of the actual pitch because of the tuning, because it's going to get confusing. So I'm going to refer to this as B, even though technically pitch-wise it's going to sound like A. Just keep that in mind. but we're doing. So just that octave jump and then grabbing that flat 7. Then basically move over to the 4 chord right there, and that's technically going to be D, but it's going to look and feel like E, right? Then back to the 1 chord. Right there, go up to the 5 chord right there. Then he starts doing such a cool change there. So 2 times on the 5 chord, and then right there. And then when you get right there, you're going to basically hit this B flat, and I'm just hitting octaves. It's like a little turnaround right there, that B down to A flat, G to G flat. And right there, when you hit that G flat or F sharp, whichever, then you're going to go back to that 5 chord right there. So playing all the way through that riff. Such a cool riff. So with that rhythm riff looped, here's that lead again. You know, something like that. So he's actually playing out of his signature, Albert King box. And we're going to talk about that right after this. With that solo, he's basically starting here and doing a whole step bend and release on that E note, and then coming down and grabbing that B right there. And he ends on that A. And right there, he basically shifts in the minor pentatonic box for that lick. Like that. Do that bend again. And then right here, he's bending that E up a whole step, then he does an index finger bend right there on that D note. Right? So that's really interesting because you definitely hear Albert do a lot of that. And we're going to talk about those index finger bends. We're also going to talk about the Albert King box here in just a second. But right there, and then, so right there, he's kind of doing this like, kind of, I guess, call and response kind of phrasing in a way. And then, and he comes down the box again, right like that. And then this next lick is really cool. And it's basically when the chords are changing behind him. So that's right out of the box. And then right there, he's basically shifting in the next position, but he's also grabbing that C sharp. Really tasty lick there. And then right here, he's going to basically grab this F sharp, and he's doing a pre-bend and release. And then he's going to grab this E and bends that up a whole step. Like that. It's almost like somebody whistling or something. And then, like that. And then that last last little lick when the turnaround's happening definitely sounds like Clapton to me, which I know Eric Clapton is definitely directly influenced by Albert King. But that's a killer solo, and with that rhythm part too, it just comes to life. Now it's time to explain the Albert King box, and this is very historic and important, and definitely lots of guitarists borrowed this directly from Albert's fingers. And what we're going to do here, I just want to basically identify what it is, where it is, and then how you can kind of, grab it. So, just think of the minor pentatonic box, right? And there's the good old box. So now think of the position right after that, right here. Right? That position of minor pentatonic. And basically it's just the top 3 strings. That's the elusive Albert King box right there. So definitely Albert loved playing out of that shape right there. It's very finger friendly. But then after you've learned that box, if you think of like where we are, kind of based off that B, there's your root note right there. Right? So you definitely hear Albert grab that note a lot. You can definitely hear him do index finger bends from that A up to that B. Like that. You can also hear him bend from that D. Doing that kind of thing. Because he's basically targeting that B. Do a bend and release on that E note. And then do a smear bend on that D upward and then end on that B. It's kind of a signature Albert King lick. Like that. And then you could do a similar thing from below. Make like little Albert King licks right there just by kind of smear bending with your index finger. That kind of stuff. But that's really eye-opening. Now once you have that box under your fingers, it's really important to understand what you have, like say over the 1 chord, the 4 chord, and the 5 chord of a blues progression, because Albert would recycle that same box and those same notes, but they take on different roles, depending on what chord you're playing over. So over the 1 chord, like B, or B7, right, it's going to have a certain sound, over that root note. And your root note's right there, that B. Now, over the 4 chord, right, E, there's your root note at the bottom and the top of that scale. Right, and then over the 5 chord, F sharp, definitely catch Albert, bending that E up to F sharp. And that's kind of like the secret to, his phrasing, because he would basically target the, the root over the 1 chord. And then when it basically moves to the 4 chord, kind of targeting that E note, and then over the 5 chord, then eventually he starts targeting that F sharp. There's that E. And then there's that B. So it's all about, setting up your phrases, targeting notes over the right chord at the right time, and just being as expressive as possible. Also picking and digging in really hard too. Albert definitely was knocking those notes out of the park. So to dive a little deeper into this Albert King box and different ways you can use it, let's look at some licks from Born Under a Bad Sign. Definitely a legendary Albert King song. And in this tuning, you know, we've got... Definitely hear Albert, you know, during the course of the song, you'll hear this kind of series of licks right here, and then one of his famous, and then, you know, kind of like 4 different licks that kind of sprinkle throughout the song. That first one's just a pure slide, that C sharp to D sharp right there, and really add some intense, you know, vibrato. And then right there, you're grabbing F sharp and then that D sharp. And once again, it's very intense. There's a lot of intensity. And then right here, definitely you hear that a lot from Albert King. Also, Stevie Ray Vaughan loved that lick right there. Just a quick bend. That kind of ear-piercing, you know, bend. And right there, you can basically use a downstroke for that if you want. Just make sure you pick very hard because you want an accent, heavy, heavy accent. But also you might want to play around with upstrokes right there. Very heavy, you know, upstroke. So you can definitely play with that. Totally up to you. And then that last little phrase there, right there, definitely a very common Albert King lick, but then you'll hear Stevie Ray Vaughan borrowing that in his music too. And I love that little phrase and different variations of that phrase. But definitely check out Born Under a Bad Sign. That's a classic. Now for some more work using this Albert King box, let's take a look at some of the licks that take place during the intro solo from Crosscut Saw. And this song came from the album Born Under a Bad Sign. And Crosscut Saw is actually an A-flat 7. But in this tuning, it's going to feel like B-flat 7, right? And right there, there's the B-flat minor pentatonic box, right? And then keep in mind, here's Albert's box right here. Right? And then during this song, you'll hear... right, and it keeps going, of course. But right there, you can definitely hear him, you know, kind of entering the Albert King box. And then right there, an index finger bend. And he just kind of smears it the first time, then the second time he bends it, like up a whole step. And then... definitely takes a lot of control, you know, to get that C sharp up to that D sharp. There we go. There's like a little pause right there, and then this lick. And it's one of those hanging kind of bends that Albert liked to do. Definitely Stevie Ray Vaughan picked this up from Albert too. Where you're basically bending it and you very gradually and slowly release it, and then you let go of it. Like that. Definitely check out Crosscut Saw. There's tons of licks happening in that song. It's definitely a classic. But last but not least is the opening of the song Playing on Me. And this came from Albert's album I Want to Get Funky. And that's with the Memphis Horns and the Barkays backing him up. That's a classic, great blues record. And the opening here, the rhythm section's basically playing this 5-4-1 and B. So, you know, that kind of thing. That's what the MXR clone looper's gonna play. And then you hear Albert open this song with this killer solo. One more time. So once again, we're in B or B7 right there. So there's your B minor pentatonic box. And then Albert's box is right here. Right? But we're starting on the 5 chord, that F sharp. So you hear Albert basically starting on this F sharp. And he's doing that ear-piercing bend again. And then So that, and then, and definitely Albert loves hanging on that index finger anytime he can. And then, so Albert definitely seemed fond of playing out of his box and then slipping back into the regular minor pentatonic box. And then he'd find a way to kind of move back into his, namesake box. So constantly, during his solos and stuff, he was weaving between this and this. But definitely he wouldn't really run the whole scale. It was really just the top part. Just kind of finding different ways. I'm kind of finding these. Just finding all these different ways of connecting, those licks and phrases and those scales. And there he was, doing that and playing with me. Alright, that's going to wrap this episode of Soloing Secrets. Let's look at Albert King. Definitely an essential, very important, influential, had a huge impact. As soon as he hit the scene and started issuing singles, guitarists and musicians definitely started to pay attention to Albert King. And his legacy is so essential and important. I did read somewhere, I think it was in a book, that if Albert King had never existed, then modern guitar would sound radically different as far as the string bending and phrases and stuff. And Albert, right alongside B.B. King and also Freddie King, the three kings definitely changed the face and sound of blues guitar, blues rock guitar, kind of filtered over into funk and jazz and country and other styles of music too. So definitely, legendary, essential, Albert King rules. So anyway, leave some feedback and comments. Please subscribe to Night Lessons, and I'll be back before you know it with more content and material. Thank you.